Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we try to cut through the noise and get you truly well informed. Today, we're plunging headfirst into, well, a pretty chilling reality. Imagine your most critical digital systems, right? Your data fortresses. Now picture them not just being attacked, but having their actual guards. Your security software disarmed and silenced before the main assault even kicks off. How do you even defend against an enemy that neutralizes your defenses from the inside out? That's the stark and frankly urgent reality of endpoint security today. We're talking about a landscape where the traditional defenses, the ones we've relied on, are being actively bypassed. Your digital perimeters, constantly under siege. And the sheer ingenuity of attackers, well, it forces us to rethink pretty much everything. This deep dive is absolutely crucial for anyone building a career in information systems, computer information systems, or IT, especially for a dedicated BCIS 4345 students right here at Tarleton State University's Dr. Sam Pack College of Business. We're not just giving you definitions today.
We want to provide practical takeaways, maybe some unexpected insights, and hopefully a clear roadmap for owning your career growth in this really critical and, let's face it, ever-evolving field. Our mission really is to equip you with the knowledge to understand these complex threats, implement robust security measures, and importantly, adapt to the future trends that are going to define network and system security.
Indeed, and that's a key point. The landscape of network and system security is, it's far from static. It's not something you set and forget. It's a continuous dynamic process. It involves constant analysis, careful implementation, rigorous evaluation, and crucially diligent maintenance. Understanding these evolving threats, from the fundamental risks that, never seem to go away, to the cutting-edge tactics defining future trends, it isn't merely an academic exercise. Not at all. It's absolutely essential for securing modern electronic data systems, for ensuring information and database integrity, and for mastering the most effective approaches for robust network defense. So today, we'll peel back the layers on how attackers exploit endpoints and, maybe more importantly, how we can build resilience in what is truly a hostile digital world.
Absolutely. And before we jump into the fascinating, maybe slightly terrifying details that could literally save your systems and safeguard your career, a quick favor. If you're finding these deep dives valuable, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, please take just a moment to like this episode, subscribe to the show, and maybe share it with a colleague or classmate. Your support really helps us bring more insider tips and crucial knowledge directly to you. Also, remember to check the description. We've put links to additional resources there that will complement this discussion and help further protect your career. Okay, let's unpack the digital arsenal of the attackers. So before we can even begin to think about building impenetrable defenses, we need to truly understand what we're up against, right? What exactly does the modern threat landscape look like at the endpoint? What are these digital invaders, and how have they evolved beyond just simple annoyances?
Well, what's fascinating and maybe a bit daunting is how incredibly diverse and specialized malicious software or malware has become. It's really no longer a simple annoyance. It's a sophisticated, always evolving ecosystem. It's meticulously designed to compromise one or all of those core tenets of information security: confidentiality, integrity, or availability, the classic CIA triad. At its essence, malware is any software that gets into a computer system intending to interfere with normal functions or perform unwanted, harmful actions. But the critical difference today, the thing modern security pros really need to grasp, isn't just that it's bad software. It's almost chameleon-like ability to perfectly mimic legitimate processes. That makes it incredibly difficult to spot, without advanced behavioral analysis. It's the art of digital camouflage, I suppose, that truly elevates the threat level.
That digital camouflage, that's what makes it so insidious. It's not just one weapon, like you said, but a whole armory, each with its own specific brand of nastiness. Let's start with some of the maybe more well-known digital invaders, but really dig into their modern implications. Take keyloggers, for instance. We've heard of them, but what makes them such a persistent and evolving threat?
Keyloggers are particularly insidious because they directly target the confidentiality of your most sensitive inputs. Everything you typed. They capture and store every single keystroke you make. Everything from, casual messages to the most sensitive data imaginable. Usernames, passwords, credit card numbers, confidential emails, proprietary business documents. Imagine a hidden recorder embedded directly into your keyboard, just silently transcribing everything you type. No visual cues, no performance hit. This goes way beyond simple data theft. It's a direct line for identity theft, corporate espionage. And what's even more surprising, as some sources note, is that the concept isn't purely digital. Keystroke logging can also involve physical hardware devices, discreetly installed between your keyboard and computer, or even techniques that monitor typing speed, pauses, the actual acoustic signatures of your key presses to translate messages.
Oh, the sound.
Yeah, the sound. It blurs the line between digital and physical surveillance, making it a pretty comprehensive threat to information confidentiality. For network defense, spotting these often needs deep packet inspection, looking for unusual outbound connections, or behavioral analysis hunting for unexpected system calls.
That's a chilling thought. That physical element adds another whole layer of concern. And then there's spyware. Feels like a close cousin to the keylogger, maybe, but with an even broader scope. How does it operate? What's its main goal?
Indeed. Spyware secretly monitors a computer or maybe a mobile device, collecting a really wide array of sensitive information, all without the user's knowledge or, crucially, explicit consent. And it isn't just limited to keystrokes, it extends to your web browsing history, your email correspondence, instant messaging chats, downloaded files, even geographical location data if it's on a mobile device. It's basically a constant digital surveillance agent, effectively mapping your entire digital life and potentially your physical movements too. What makes spyware particularly tricky is how often it disguises itself as a potentially unwanted program, a PUP. Yeah, a PUP. It's often a gray area. Software might seem benign, maybe even offer some small utility, but secretly bundles in data gathering capabilities. The real danger is that a PUP can very easily escalate into full-blown malware, gathering critical info like logins, passwords, intellectual property. It morphs from an annoyance into a full-scale information thief, its primary goal, compromising information confidentiality, often just paving the way for more exploitation or maybe selling the data.
The deception is absolutely central there, isn't it? Which brings us perfectly to the classic Trojan horse of the digital world malware that doesn't just gather data, but actively infiltrates and compromises.
Exactly. A Trojan, true to its name, is malware that looks harmless or even desirable. Maybe a free game, a useful utility, a software update, you know the type. But once installed, it contains this hidden malicious payload designed to cause significant damage to the computer or network. It gets in purely by deception, leveraging social engineering or maybe disguised downloads. And a specific, really potent variant is the Remote Access Trojan, or RAT.
RAT.
A SAI is a specific type of Trojan that, once it runs, establishes a backdoor for an attacker, allows them to remotely access and control a victim's computer or network completely without the user knowing. The key difference here is that while a general Trojan might do various malicious things, like installing other malware or stealing data, RAT specifically focuses on setting up that persistent, covert remote control. This lets attackers manipulate the system from afar, maintain that access over time, and carry out other objectives. Makes it a critical threat to availability and integrity.
So it's not just about getting in, it's about maintaining control, taking over. Got it. Then we have the notorious replicators, the viruses and worms. For our BCIS students listening, what are the crucial distinctions and maybe the modern evolutions of these self-propagating threats?
Okay, so a virus, in its traditional sense, is designed to replicate itself by infecting other files or systems, usually on the same computer or network. Think of it as needing a host program to run. It injects malicious code into that program, and when the host program runs, the virus code runs too, often looking for other programs to infect. Historically, these were often disruptive, pretty noticeable, but modern viruses, much stealthier. We mainly see two types today that pose distinct challenges. A file-based virus still infects executable files or files with executable code like scripts or macros. It often disguises itself or uses stealth techniques to try and avoid detection. In contrast, a fileless virus is a really significant evolution. It doesn't rely on traditional executable files sitting on the disk.
No file. How does that work?
It exploits vulnerabilities directly within system processes or memory RAM to execute its code. This makes it much harder to detect with traditional signature-based antivirus methods because there's no static file to scan. It's essentially living off the land, using the operating system's own legitimate functions against itself.
Living off the land.
Okay. And worms, they're the ones that don't need a host program, right?
Yeah.
That self-sufficiency sounds even more dangerous.
That's precisely correct. A worm is distinct because it's malware that spreads itself from one computer to another over a network without any human interaction. It doesn't need to attach to a legitimate program. Worms are self-contained programs. They exploit network vulnerabilities to automatically replicate and spread really rapidly, infecting multiple systems in a very short time. They actively search for other vulnerable machines on a network and then just self-propagate, often causing widespread disruption or installing other malware as they go. If a worm can spread across a network without needing a user to click anything, well, even a single vulnerable machine can potentially bring down an entire enterprise very quickly. The biggest challenge in containing a fast-spreading worm once it's inside, its speed and its autonomous nature, requires immediate network segmentation, massive patching efforts. They're primary threats to availability, and they can easily compromise integrity too. Beyond these, explicitly malicious threats, I've also heard the term bloatware. Is that just annoying software that comes with a new PC, or does it actually pose a security risk that our listeners should be aware of?
Bloatware. Yeah, while it's often seen as just an annoyance, it can absolutely pose significant security risks that are, I think, frequently underestimated. It's that software that comes pre-installed on a computer or mobile device, right, by the manufacturer or the OS vendor. Often stuff you didn't ask for. It's frequently unnecessary, can be resource-intensive, slowing down performance, consuming valuable storage space. But more critically, bloatware expands the attack surface of a device. Every pre-installed app is another potential vulnerability point. It might have unpatched flaws, maybe it requests excessive permissions it doesn't need, or simply doesn't follow security best practices. It can inadvertently expose the user to vulnerabilities and, in some cases, even be exploited to deliver other malware or secretly gather data. Impacts confidentiality and integrity. Honestly, removing unnecessary bloatware is a fundamental step in hardening any endpoint. Basic security hygiene.
Okay, good to know. It's not just clutter. And what about bots? I always picture this sort of army of them, and that's usually not a good sign in the digital world.
That's a very accurate mental image, actually, because a bot is a software application designed to automate tasks on a computer or network, often, yes, for malicious purposes. Individually, bots can do a wide range of things. Simple stuff like web crawling, data scraping, or more complex things like launching credential stuffing attacks. However, when they're coordinated into a network of compromised computers, that's when they form a botnet. And that is a truly formidable digital army under an attacker's command. These botnets are responsible for many of the most sophisticated and large-scale cyber attacks we see. Launching distributed denial of service, DDoS, attacks that cripple services, distributing massive amounts of spam, widespread phishing campaigns, stealing sensitive data on a huge scale. The sheer scale and coordinated nature of botnet attacks make them incredibly difficult to defend against. They hammer availability and confidentiality on a grand scale.
Wow. So many ways to get in and cause trouble, often exploiting our own systems against us. What about something more targeted, maybe more time-sensitive, like a logic bomb? It sounds like a ticking clock of destruction.
A logic bomb is exactly that, a type of malware that stays dormant, often subtly hidden inside a legitimate program until a very specific event or condition triggers it. That trigger could be anything, really. A certain date or time, the deletion of a specific file running a particular program, even something like an employee getting terminated from a company. Once triggered, boom. The logic bomb causes damage, deletes critical data, steals sensitive information. Its stealthy, delayed activation makes it particularly difficult to detect before it's too late. It just sits there looking innocent within seemingly legitimate code until its moment arrives. These are often planted by disgruntled insiders or maybe sophisticated attackers looking for long-term delayed impact, a severe threat to integrity and availability.
That's quite clever and, yeah, incredibly hard to trace back if it goes off months later. And then we have rootkits and backdoors. These sound like they're specifically designed to hide the attacker's tracks and ensure persistent, unauthorized access.
Precisely. A rootkit is malware meticulously designed to hide its own presence and the presence of other malware on a computer or network. Attackers use rootkits to gain privileged access, often root level or administrator access to a system, and crucially, to avoid detection by security software. They do this by modifying the operating system itself, intercepting system calls, hiding processes and files from being seen by legitimate monitoring tools. It allows them to maintain a deep, really stealthy foothold. Closely related is a backdoor. That's a type of program, or sometimes just a vulnerability, that lets an attacker gain unauthorized access to a system or network, bypassing normal authentication or encryption. Backdoors can be pre-programmed by malicious developers or created by other malware. They're used to steal data, install more malware, launch further attacks, or just control the system remotely, ensuring continued covert access. Both are absolutely fundamental tools for achieving persistence and evading detection, a massive threat to confidentiality and integrity.
And then, the big one everyone hears about, the one that often makes the headlines: ransomware. This seems to be the ultimate goal for so many attacks, just locking down everything until you pay up.
Ransomware is indeed one of the most pervasive and frankly damaging forms of cyber attack today. It directly targets the availability of your data and systems. It's malicious software that encrypts a victim's data, making it completely inaccessible, and then demands a ransom payment, usually in cryptocurrency, for its restoration. And it's often the final, devastating stage of a much more extensive compromise, where attackers have already gotten in, established a foothold, maybe moved laterally. Real-world examples like the Medusa, Crypto24, Ransom Hub, Quillen gangs, they're constantly in the news, highlights just how prevalent and destructive these attacks are across all industries. What's particularly alarming, and this comes from insights within the security community, is that these ransomware crews often don't even bother trying to evade your endpoint security anymore.
They don't.
No. They simply kill it outright before launching their encryption payload. This shows a significant escalation in attacker sophistication. They're leveraging specialized tools specifically designed to blind your defenses first.
That leads me to a really chilling point we touched on earlier, the concept of cyber kidnapping. While traditional ransomware is about data, how does endpoint compromise directly facilitate something like this profound psychological manipulation?
It's a terrifying convergence, isn't it? Digital compromise meets psychological warfare. An attacker might initially use spyware or maybe a RAT, compromise perhaps through a simple phishing email sent to an endpoint, to steal personal photos, voice samples, access private communications, just gather deeply personal stuff. With this stolen data, they can then leverage AI tools, deep fake technology to manipulate social circles, craft highly convincing threats, and orchestrate a cyber kidnapping scenario, making the threat feel incredibly real to the victim's family or associates. The endpoint compromise isn't just about data loss anymore. It's the gateway to profound psychological manipulation, exploiting trust and fear in a very visceral way. It really showcases how initial compromises of confidentiality can quickly escalate into attacks on personal safety, mental well-being, demands a much more holistic view of security, one that extends beyond just the digital realm.
So malware isn't just about software anymore. It can be about manipulating perception, exploiting trust, leveraging these digital tools in really insidious ways. Okay, beyond these distinct malware types, what about vulnerabilities inherent in the applications themselves? The chinks in the armor, so to speak, that even well-intentioned software can present.
Absolutely. Application vulnerabilities are critical points of entry, often residing deep within the code of legitimate software we use every day. Two common and highly exploitable examples are buffer overflows and improper exception and error handling. A buffer overflow is a classic software vulnerability. It happens when a program tries to write more data into a temporary storage area in memory, a buffer, than it can actually hold. You used the analogy earlier, pouring a gallon of water into a pint glass. The excess spills out, corrupts whatever's nearby.
Right.
In computing, this overflow can overwrite adjacent memory locations. Those locations might hold critical data, or worse, program instructions. This can lead to data corruption, program crashes, or, most critically for attackers, it can allow them to inject and execute arbitrary malicious code. By carefully crafting the data they overflow the buffer with, an attacker can corrupt things like return pointers on the program stack, diverting the program's execution flow straight to their injected shellcode, a small piece of code designed to give the attacker control. Direct compromise of system integrity and availability.
So it's about exceeding those physical limits within the digital space, which then creates an opening.
Okay. And improper error handling, how does that open the door for attackers? It sounds like maybe just a simple coding oversight.
It might sound simple, but improper exception and error handling refers to a really pervasive software flaw. It's where a program doesn't properly manage unexpected situations, runtime errors, invalid user input, system failures. Instead of gracefully recovering, maybe securely logging the issue, or just showing a generic error message, these flaws can inadvertently expose internal system details. Or they might leave the program in an insecure state, or even lead directly to security vulnerabilities and data corruption. For instance, an overly verbose error message might reveal database schema information, internal server IP addresses, application logic details, giving an attacker valuable reconnaissance data.
Free intel, basically. Exactly. Attackers can often trigger these errors intentionally, maybe by feeding the program malformed inputs, just to gather information, bypass security checks, or even crash the application. Impacts confidentiality and availability. Robust error handling is just a fundamental part of secure software development.
Okay, so with those inherent vulnerabilities in mind, what are some of the most common attacks that actually exploit them, turning these weaknesses into wide open doors?
We see a whole range of common application attacks. Scripting attacks, for instance, are very prevalent. Cross-site scripting, or XSS, is a prime example. This involves attackers injecting malicious client-side scripts, often JavaScript, into web pages that other users then view. This typically happens by exploiting unvalidated user input on websites. Let's say a website's comment section doesn't properly sanitize the input. An attacker can post a comment containing malicious script tags. When another user views that comment, their browser just executes the attacker's script. That script can then steal their session cookies, maybe redirect them to malicious sites, or even deface the web page itself. It's a direct compromise of that client-side interaction with the web application. Impacts confidentiality and integrity.
XSS is one I hear about constantly. What about SQL injection? That sounds like it targets the actual data behind the application.
SQL injection, or SQL, is another really prominent and incredibly dangerous attack. It targets the underlying databases that power most web applications. An attacker inserts malicious SQL statements into an entry field like a login form, search bar, maybe a URL parameter, which are then executed by the database server. This can allow attackers to dump the entire contents of a database-sensitive user info like usernames, passwords, credit card numbers, proprietary business data directly to themselves.
How does that actually work? Can you give a quick example?
Sure. Imagine a login field. Instead of entering a valid username, an attacker might input something like RR1. This statement, when the application combines it with the original query, could transform a legitimate query like select from users, where username input and password, into something like select from users, where username and password is equal. The 1-1 part is always true, potentially granting access, and they usually comments out the rest of the original query, making the password check irrelevant.
Okay. Clever.
Or for stealing data, they might use something like union select column 1, column 2 from sensitive votable to append data from other secret tables onto the query's normal output. It's essentially tricking the application into running unauthorized database commands, leads to massive confidentiality breaches.
That's a really powerful way to gain unauthorized access and steal data. And privilege escalation, that sounds like, I don't know, a hacker's ultimate dream, gaining full control of the system.
It absolutely is. Privilege escalation happens when an attacker, who initially has maybe just limited access, manages to gain illicit access to elevated rights or privileges way beyond what they're entitled to. This can happen in two main ways. There's vertical privilege escalation, where a low-privilege user gains higher privileges, like a standard user becoming an administrator. And there's horizontal privilege escalation, where a user gains the privileges of another similar user, maybe accessing someone else's account. For example, a regular user account, maybe initially compromised through a phishing email, could then exploit a vulnerability in an OS component or maybe a misconfigured application to gain administrative or even system-level privileges. Once an attacker has higher privileges, they have far greater control over the compromised system. They can disable security features, install persistent malware like rootkits, access critical data, conduct further attacks pretty much unchallenged. It's a direct threat to integrity and confidentiality.
Are there attacks that specifically target the fundamental building blocks of a system, like, say, the file systems or memory itself?
Yes, definitely. Directory traversal is an attack that exploits vulnerabilities to let an attacker access files and directories outside of the intended web root directory. An attacker might manipulate a URL or an input field with sequences like .. to navigate up the directory tree to sensitive system files that aren't meant to be public, potentially exposing configuration files, password hashes, maybe even application source code. Memory injection is another one. Here, threat actors introduce malicious code or data directly into a program's running memory, into RAM, to alter its behavior or execute unauthorized commands. Unlike traditional malware that sits on the disk, memory injection is stealthy because it often leaves no trace on the file system. Makes it harder to detect and analyze. This can lead to arbitrary code execution or data exfiltration directly from memory, a significant challenge to integrity and confidentiality.
And what about timing-based attacks, where the vulnerability is in those fleeting moments between processes executing?
Those generally fall under race conditions, specifically something called time of check to time of use, or to talk to you. This happens when two concurrent threads of execution access a shared resource simultaneously, and the outcome depends critically on the precise order of their execution. Leads to unintended consequences. An attacker can exploit this by influencing a resource's state in the tiny window between a security check and the resource's actual use. For instance, a system might check if a file is safe for an operation, but in that tiny fraction of a second between the check finishing and the file actually being used, an attacker rapidly swaps it out for a malicious one.
Wow, that fast.
Milliseconds, often. This tiny window of opportunity can be devastating. Allows an attacker to bypass security checks, execute malicious code, gain unauthorized access. And lastly, we have forgery. This involves creating fabricated requests, often to trick a system or a user into performing an unintended action. This can range from things like cross-site request forgery, CSRF, where an attacker tricks a logged-in user's browser into sending an authenticated request to a vulnerable web application without the user knowing, to maybe forging digital identities or documents. These attacks manipulate trust and system logic, impacting integrity and confidentiality.
Okay, so we've cataloged the bad guys and their very sneaky tricks, from the fundamental malware types to these deeply technical application vulnerabilities. Now, how do we, the good guys, fight back? Historically, we've relied on some key endpoint defenses, but as we'll see, the game is rapidly changing, and our traditional fortresses seem to be under unprecedented strain.
And this really raises that important question. Are our traditional defenses still sufficient against today's increasingly sophisticated threats, especially those specifically designed to bypass or even, as we mentioned, disable them entirely? The first line of defense has always been about securing the endpoints themselves, right? Fortifying each individual digital asset.
Let's start with maybe the most basic yet still essential tool, antivirus software. How has AV evolved, and what are its current strengths and, maybe more importantly, limitations?
Antivirus software, AV, yeah, it's been a cornerstone of endpoint security for decades, and it has continued to evolve. Its primary job is to detect, prevent, and remove malware infections on devices, desktops, laptops, servers. Historically, AV relied heavily on signature-based detection, scanning files for known malicious code patterns like digital fingerprints. And while that's still effective against known threats, it really struggles with new or polymorphic malware that changes its appearance. So modern AV has moved towards heuristic analysis, which identifies suspicious behaviors or characteristics of unknown files. And increasingly, it incorporates behavioral analysis, monitoring processes, and system calls for potentially malicious actions in real time. However, even with these advancements, AV often struggles against highly targeted attacks, fileless attacks that live in memory, or malware designed specifically to evade its detection mechanisms. It's a necessary foundational layer, definitely, but it's absolutely no longer a sufficient standalone defense.
Okay, foundational, but not enough on its own.
Yeah.
And our web browsers, which are basically our window to the internet, are a huge attack surface, right? Often the entry point for drive-by downloads, phishing attacks.
Yeah.
How do we secure them effectively?
Web browsers are indeed a primary attack vector. Securing them is paramount. Improving endpoint security fundamentally requires using secure and, crucially, regularly updated web browsers. Modern browsers integrate critical security features that have evolved significantly over the years. For example, sandboxing.
Sandboxing.
Yeah, it runs browser processes in isolated environments. Prevents malicious code in one tab from affecting the rest of your system if that tab gets compromised. They also include robust pop-up blockers, sophisticated phishing protection warning you about known malicious sites, and protection against drive-by downloads and malicious redirects. Furthermore, the use of secure cookies, transmitted only over HTTPS, helps prevent session hijacking, where an attacker steals your active login session. And things like HTTP security headers, content security policy, CSP, X-frame options, they mitigate against XSS and clickjacking attacks by telling the browser to take specific security actions, like only loading scripts from trusted sources or preventing a page from being embedded in a hidden iframe. But despite all these advancements, browsers remain a constant target, requires continuous patching, and honestly, user vigilance.
User vigilance always key. Okay, beyond individual software like AV and browsers, we also have systems dedicated to monitoring and responding to threats across our endpoints. Can you walk us through the progression from those early host-based systems to the more comprehensive solutions we see today?
Certainly. We have several layers of monitoring and response systems. Historically, we started with a host intrusion detection system, or HID. HID monitors activity on a single endpoint like one server or one desktop, looking for signs of unauthorized access or malicious activity. It analyzes system logs, file integrity, process behavior, then alerts administrators if it sees something suspicious. Building on that, a host intrusion prevention system, or HIPS, emerged. It's similar to HIs, but it goes a step further by actively trying to prevent malicious activity on that single endpoint, blocking actions based on predefined rules.
So HID detects, HPS prevents, but still just on one machine.
Exactly. Both HIDs and EPS operate largely in silos. They give limited visibility across an entire network. Taking a broader, more integrated view, we now have endpoint detection and response, or EDR. EDR is a much more robust, sort of next-generation tool. It's designed to detect, prevent, and respond to threats across multiple endpoints in a network. Provides much wider visibility and control over an entire fleet of devices. EDR collects and analyzes endpoint data, uses advanced analytics, often including AI and machine learning, to detect complex threats, and provides automated response capabilities, like isolating a compromised machine from the network. The key distinction really is the scope. HE ships are primarily per device, focused inward. EDR provides a centralized, network-wide view, offering deeper insights and enabling much faster response times.
Okay, so EDR is like the modern network-aware watchdog. Got it.
Right.
But what about hardening the endpoints themselves, making them inherently more resistant to attack before any sophisticated monitoring tools are even needed? Fortifying the castle walls, like you said earlier.
Yeah. Right. Hardening endpoints is all about fortifying those castle walls, making them inherently resilient. Patch management is absolutely crucial here, and honestly, often underestimated. It's a continuous process of identifying, testing, and deploying software updates, or patches, to fix vulnerabilities and security flaws in all your software and systems. This involves both distributing patches across a network efficiently and ensuring timely reception and installation on individual endpoints. Think of it, as regularly repairing and reinforcing the walls of your digital castle against the new siege weapons and structural weaknesses that are discovered literally every day. Unpatched systems are just low-hanging fruit for attackers. Similarly, secure operating systems, the OS itself, form the very foundation of endpoint security. A secure OS is designed from the ground up to prevent unauthorized access, protect against malware, and provide a robust, stable, secure platform for running applications. This includes features like kernel hardening, making the OS core more resilient, mandatory access controls that restrict what users and processes can actually do, and secure enclaves for isolating sensitive operations in memory. These are fundamental for maintaining system integrity and availability. Now, beyond those individual defenses on the endpoint, understanding the attacker's methodology is really key to any kind of preemptive defense. This cyber kill chain, which was developed by Lockheed Martin, provides a pretty structured view of a typical attack. It breaks it down into distinct phases that we, as defenders, can then try to disrupt.
So it's like a universal playbook for how attacks usually unfold, a blueprint for digital crime. What are these 7 crucial stages that our BCIS 43345 students really need to internalize for effective network defense?
The cyber kill chain outlines 7 stages an attacker typically follows. Knowing them lets ethical hackers and defenders place controls, or at least monitoring, at each step. Stage 1, reconnaissance. This is the information gathering phase. Attackers harvest email addresses, identify potentially vulnerable systems or accounts, maybe research target employees or technologies online, map out the network infrastructure. They might use public sources like LinkedIn, company websites, or tools like Shodan to find open ports. Just gathering intel.
Scouting the target.
Right.
Good.
Stage 2, weaponization. Here, the attacker designs an exploit and bundles it with a malicious payload into some kind of deliverable package. For example, creating a malicious PDF document or an executable file that, when opened, exploits a software vulnerability and installs malware. They build their weapon. Stage 3, delivery. This is about getting that exploit payload to the target. Common methods: phishing emails with malicious attachments or links, malicious web downloads, drive-by downloads, maybe infected USB drives left conveniently in a parking lot, or exploiting publicly facing services.
Getting the weapon through the door.
Stage 4, exploitation. At this stage, the attacker successfully executes their malicious code by leveraging a vulnerability in the target system. This might be that buffer overflow we talked about, an unpatched software flaw, a misconfiguration that allows code to run. This is where their weapon actually fires. Stage 5, installation. Once exploitation works, the attacker typically installs additional malware on the victim's system. Could be a backdoor for persistent access, maybe a rootkit to hide their presence, or other tools to further compromise the system, or just establish a solid foothold for later stages.
Setting up camp inside.
Stage 6, command and control, C2. After installation, the malware establishes a remote channel back to the attackers, allowing them to control the victim's system from afar. This C2 communication lets the attacker issue commands, download more tools, exfiltrate data, and these channels are often hidden within legitimate protocols like HTTP or DNS to try and evade detection.
Calling home. And the final stage.
Stage 7, actions on objectives. This is the end game, where the attackers carry out their ultimate malicious activities. Could be data theft, could be sabotage, deploying ransomware, launching DDoS attacks from the compromised system, or maybe just maintaining a long-term presence for espionage. Achieving their goal. For ethical hacking, for network defense, knowing these stages is paramount. It allows us to implement controls and monitoring at each phase. If we can break the chain at any single point, the attack fails. It's a really fundamental structure for incident response and threat modeling.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and frankly quite alarming for me. We've talked about EDR being our robust watchdog, our multi-endpoint guardian. But what happens when the attackers are so advanced, they don't just try to sneak past your EDR, they actually kill it. This completely upends the traditional defense model, doesn't it? Brings to life that initial analogy of disarming the guards before the fight.
It really does. And it raises an important, maybe even existential question about how much we rely on purely endpoint-centric defenses. Insights from the security community, particularly on platforms like Reddit, where practitioners share real-world observations, highlight a stark and increasingly common reality. Ransomware crews, other sophisticated threat actors, are now actively employing tools specifically designed to bypass and disable EDR platforms before their main payload even launches. This isn't just theory, it's documented, observed, widespread tactics in real-world breaches. It means we have to assume that our endpoint agents can be compromised or disabled. That necessitates a critical shift in our overall security strategy.
So these are literally EDR killers, tools built specifically to neutralize our primary endpoint defense. Can you give us a bit more of a technical peek into how these actually operate? At a low level, how are they managing to bypass these supposedly sophisticated systems?
Exactly. We're definitely witnessing the rise of highly effective EDR killers. Ransomware operators, including prominent gangs like Crypto24, Ransom Hub Medusa, Quillen, are using kernel-level tools to disable EDR products from even the top-tier vendors. For instance, Crypto24 apparently uses a customized tool called Real Blinding EDR. It disables kernel hooks using hard-coded lists of EDR specifics targeting their known components directly. Ransom Hub's tool, EDR Killshifter, frequently abuses legitimate but vulnerable drivers and what we call BYOVD, or bring your own vulnerable driver attacks.
Bring your own vulnerable drive.
Yeah. They load a digitally signed, but known to be vulnerable legitimate device driver into the system kernel. Because it's signed, the OS often allows it. Once they have code running at the kernel level via this vulnerable driver, these malicious kernel drivers can directly manipulate critical operating system structures. See, an EDR typically relies on kernel callbacks. These are functions the OS itself invokes before executing sensitive actions, like creating a new process, opening a file, loading another driver. EDRs hook into these callbacks to monitor activity. What the EDR killers do is locate these EDR callbacks in kernel memory and either remove them from the OS's callback list entirely, or sometimes they patch the EDR's own handler function to basically do nothing. This makes the EDR sensors effectively blind and its prevention actions ineffective before the ransomware payload ever launches. And these tools are often packed using techniques like hardcrypt or injected into legitimate utilities to mask their true nature, making them even harder to spot initially. The critical takeaway here is that this isn't isolated incidents, it's a widespread shared practice within cybercriminal communities. It's evolving rapidly through collaborative tool frameworks. It's not just bypassing the guards anymore. It really is disarming them and locking them in the armory before the main assault even begins.
That's a powerful and, terrifying analogy. If they're disarming our guards at that fundamental kernel level, it means our traditional endpoint security, if we rely on it as a single layer, can become a critical single point of failure.
Right.
And it's not just about killing EDRs, right? Modern malware is also incredibly good at hiding itself, isn't it? Evading detection, even if the EDR is still nominally running.
Absolutely. Malware obfuscation and anti-analysis techniques are highly advanced now, making even active running EDRs struggle sometimes. Modern malware uses polymorphism, meaning it mutates its code to look different in each instance of infection. It makes traditional signature-based detection very difficult because the fingerprint keeps changing. It also employs packing, compressing and encrypting its core code so it's not decipherable until runtime. Further evades detection and resists static analysis environments where analysts try to pick it apart. A significant challenge for security analysts is that malware often detects if it's running in a virtualized environment, like an emulator or hypervisor used for analysis, and if it thinks it's being watched, it will intentionally not execute its malicious payload to avoid being analyzed.
It knows it's in a sandbox.
Exactly. It can use subtle environmental checks, CPU features, memory size, presence of specific analysis tools, even system timers to detect if it's in a sandbox or VM. They can even use trigger-based behaviors where the malicious logic only activates under very specific runtime conditions. Maybe a particular date, the presence of certain files, an established internet connection to a specific domain, or even specific user activity. If these conditions aren't met during analysis, the malware appears completely benign.
That's incredibly sneaky. What about AI and machine learning defenses? We hear so much about their power these days. Can't malware evade those too?
Unfortunately, yes. Attackers are actively finding ways to defeat machine learning-based detection models. It's the next frontier in the cat-and-mouse game. We're seeing mimicry attacks where malicious features are carefully morphed to look exactly like benign ones, tricking the ML model into misclassifying the attack as legitimate. Polymorphic blending is another technique. Attack payloads are encoded and padded with extra data to match the statistical properties of benign payloads. Makes them harder for ML algorithms to distinguish based on the patterns they've learned. And perhaps most concerning for the long term is data poisoning, sometimes called targeted noise injection. This involves injecting crafted, often irrelevant features into the training data that an ML algorithm uses to learn. The goal is to mislead the ML algorithms during their learning phase, causing them to build an incorrect or biased detection model from the start.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Precisely. It exploits that fundamental weakness. The practical takeaway from all of this is pretty stark. We must assume that endpoint agents, no matter how advanced, can be compromised or disabled. This necessitates a critical shift in our security strategy, moving our focus towards building independent verification layers that don't rely solely on the integrity of the endpoint itself.
Okay, so if our endpoint guardians can be killed, if our primary defenses can be bypassed or blinded, what does this all mean for our overall security strategy? How do we adapt? How do we build systems that are truly resilient in the face of such advanced adversaries?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it means moving decisively beyond relying on any single point of failure. It means wholeheartedly embracing a robust defense-in-depth model. This is absolutely critical for effectively managing operations, for monitoring, and for responding to incidents in today's threat landscape. No single control is infallible. Every layer needs backup, and we just have to assume that at some point, some layer will be breached.
Defense in depth. That sounds like an old military strategy almost, applied to cybersecurity. How does this layered approach actually function in practice, especially when we know our endpoint guards might be compromised?
Exactly. Think of it like an onion, right? Multiple independent layers of security wrapping around your critical assets. If an attacker breaches one layer, they immediately encounter the next. Slows their progress, provides additional detection opportunities. This layered approach explicitly recognizes that some controls will fail or be bypassed. So you need independent, redundant mechanisms operating at different points in your infrastructure. The critical element here, especially now we know EDRs can be killed, is the need for what some call a second opinion control plane. Not just more EDR, but independent verification from different vantage points across your network and systems. Vantage points that don't rely on that same potentially compromised endpoint agent.
Okay, so what are some of these critical second opinion layers, these independent verification points that can give us a clue when our endpoints might be blind?
Network monitoring, or network detection and response, NDR, is an absolutely unavoidable and crucial layer here. Consider this. Post-breach activities like lateral movement within the network, command and control, C2, communication back to attacker infrastructure, and eventually data exfiltration. All of these must traverse the network. Hackers can kill an agent on an endpoint, they can wipe logs on that endpoint, but they cannot erase packets that have already been transmitted across the network infrastructure.
The network doesn't lie, basically.
Pretty much. Even if the traffic is tunneled or encrypted, network monitoring can still identify anomalies in the connection metadata. Things like source and destination IPs, protocols, ports used, amount of data in and out, connection duration, directionality, handshake patterns, packet sizes, host names being contacted, the frequency of connections, unusual durations like really long-lasting C2 sessions, or high frequencies like rhythmic beaconing those regular small communications back to C2 servers or suspicious destinations. Maybe they're living off the trusted sites using legitimate services like CloudFront, S3, or Azure that are normally okay but are being abused by attackers. These are all red flags that network monitoring can catch. NDR often provides the earliest detection of an active breach, especially if the endpoint is compromised. Now, historically, NDR sometimes suffered from being noisy, complex, hard to deploy, but modern solutions are significantly improving, providing much higher fidelity detections through advanced analytics and machine learning.
So the network always tells a story, even if the endpoint itself has gone silent.
Makes sense. What other independent sources of truth are there that our students should be focusing on incorporating?
Identity telemetry is another crucial independent layer, especially for detecting identity-based attacks, which are increasingly common. This includes looking for anomalies like Kerberos abuse exploiting Windows authentication protocols or impossible logins, where a user logs in from New York and then an hour later from London.
Geographically impossible. Or maybe mass account lockouts, indicating a brute force or password spraying attack. Identity systems often reveal lateral movement before large-scale data exfiltration occurs. Provides an early warning signal from a completely different perspective than the endpoint or the network traffic. Then there are external audit trails. These are logs from services that reside outside your directly controlled endpoint and network stack. Things like your email services, Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, your SaaS applications, your DNS logs. These logs can reveal C2 domains that attackers are using, maybe anomalous mailbox rules being set up automatically to forward emails, or cloud privilege escalations happening in your AWS or Azure environment, things that might be invisible from the endpoint itself. They provide an independent record of activity across critical cloud services.
Okay, network, identity, external logs. What about something a bit more proactive, almost like setting traps for attackers, creating a defensive minefield within our own systems?
That's exactly where deception technologies come in, deploying curveballs, like honeypots.
Honeypot.
Yeah, decoy systems designed specifically to attract and trap attackers, or honey shares, fake file shares containing enticing but completely false information, or canary files specifically designed to send an alert the moment they're accessed. These provide really low noise, high signal detection. If an attacker touches any of these decoys, you know immediately that something is wrong because legitimate users should never interact with them. They act as highly sensitive tripwires. This approach yields extremely high fidelity alerts because literally any interaction is, by definition, suspicious. The practical takeaway here is vital for anyone managing security operations. You have to implement and configure security measures across multiple domains, endpoint, network, identity, cloud, deception, and continuously assess their effectiveness. It's all about building resilience through redundancy and independent verification. Understanding that the battle is multifaceted, you can't put all your eggs in one basket, especially not the endpoint basket anymore. Now, while we extensively focus on preventing full system compromise, data exfiltration, and all that, we also need to consider the silent threat of information theft. A direct breach of privacy and integrity that often goes unnoticed until it's way too late. This is where network eavesdropping comes into play.
Eavesdropping. Yeah, it sounds exactly like secretly listening in on a private conversation. How does that translate to our digital networks, and why is it considered such an urgent threat today?
Network eavesdropping, also known as sniffing or snooping, is basically a method that retrieves user information through the internet by passively listening in on network traffic. It's considered one of the most urgent threats, especially in industries that rely on collecting, storing, transmitting sensitive data. It typically occurs on unsecured networks, think public Wi-Fi connections, maybe open corporate networks, or even shared electronic devices. Makes it relatively simple for a black hat hacker, as they say, to succeed. The real danger lies in its stealth. Attackers can intercept communications without altering them, making detection incredibly difficult unless you have specific monitoring looking for it. It's a direct assault on the confidentiality of data while it's in transit.
Okay, so it's about intercepting data as it moves across the wire or through the airwaves. What are the specific ways this can happen beyond just a generic sniffer program?
Well, there are several sophisticated types of eavesdropping attacks. One interesting, often overlooked vector is electronic performance monitoring and control systems, or EPMTSs.
EPMCS.
What's that? These are systems legitimately used by companies to track employee performance, productivity, things like that. But they become a critical attack surface if an adversary manages to gain control of them. Think about it. An attacker who achieves privilege escalation on an administrative endpoint running an EPMCS could effectively turn it into a high-fidelity covert surveillance tool. The system designed to monitor employees could be subverted to eavesdrop on them, collecting sensitive info like keystrokes, application usage, maybe even screen captures, all while operating under the guise of a legitimate enterprise application. Could easily facilitate further attacks.
Wow, that's a classic case of a legitimate tool being completely weaponized. And keystroke logging, we talked about that earlier as a malware type, but it also falls under eavesdropping, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Keystroke logging, as we discussed, captures typing activities. And this can include not just software-based keyloggers, but also those physical devices, or even the acoustic analysis monitoring the sounds of keyboard strikes to translate messages, particularly hard to detect and a comprehensive form of information theft.
Right. And man-in-the-middle attacks, we touched on those. That's also a form of eavesdropping, isn't it? But maybe with a more active role.
It is. A man-in-the-middle, or MITM attack, is an active eavesdropping method. The attacker positions themselves, logically or physically, between two communicating parties. They're then able to retrieve and even alter information being sent without either party noticing they're no longer speaking directly to each other. They can hijack communication sessions, gain control over data transport, even create independent communications, making both users think they're in a private, direct conversation. It's a profound breach of trust and integrity, often achieved through techniques like ARP poisoning, DNS spoofing, or setting up rogue Wi-Fi access points.
That's incredibly deceptive. What about anonymous networks like Tor? Aren't they supposed to protect you from this kind of eavesdropping?
Even anonymous networks have vulnerabilities that can be exploited for eavesdropping, unfortunately. Observing exit nodes, for example, is a significant risk in distributed networks like Tor. While Tor encrypts traffic through several relays to anonymize the source, the very last node before the traffic exits the Tor network, the exit node, can acquire the original unencrypted user information or messages if the traffic leaving that exit node is unencrypted, like plain old HTTP traffic. So the anonymity can be broken at the very last step, just before the data reaches its final destination. Compromises confidentiality right at the end.
And a more recent one you mentioned, Skype and Type. That sounds like a fascinating, very modern vulnerability.
Scope and type, or S&T, yeah, it's a particularly alarming newer keyboard acoustic eavesdropping attack. Exploits voice over IP, VoIP communication. What makes it dangerous is its practicality. Attackers don't necessarily need to be physically close to the victim. They can achieve high accuracy, up to like 91.7% apparently, with some knowledge of typing patterns, even with only a few leaked keystrokes.
Oh,
It leverages recording devices that might already be near the victim, their laptop microphone, maybe a smartphone microphone within range, even their own headset microphone. It infers what's being typed on their keyboard by analyzing the distinct sounds of the key presses, especially if the attacker knows the language being typed. These threats really underscore the critical importance of robust cryptographic protocols, secure communication channels. Directly addresses the course's emphasis on encryption and integrity.
given these pervasive eavesdropping threats, then, what tools and models do we actually have at our disposal to prevent such silent information theft?
A robust defense really relies on a comprehensive combination of tools and models all working together. Advanced Encryption Standard 256, AES 256, is a cornerstone. Uses 256-bit keys for securing internet layers, encrypting messages. It's the industry standard for strong encryption. Essential. Firewalls, of course, are essential for filtering network traffic, blocking malicious users from intruding into private networks by requiring authentication, enforcing strict access rules. For active monitoring, host intrusion detection systems like Bro, now Zeek, and Snort can detect abnormal traffic patterns and unauthorized access attempts, though they often need specific configurations or modifications to really target subtle eavesdropping attempts effectively.
Okay, encryption, firewalls, HIDs. What about more specialized defense models, particularly for direct communication?
For direct communication systems, cryptophones, sometimes called C-phones, utilize protocols like short authenticated strings, SS. Users verbally exchange matching strings, typically a short word or phrase shown on both devices, to ensure no network intruders, no man in the middle are present on the line. If the strings don't match, access is blocked. It verifies the communication channel's integrity directly between the users. Then there's the innovative honey encryption scheme. This is used to strengthen the protection of private information, especially maybe in instant messaging systems like WhatsApp or Snapchat, theoretically. How it works is it produces fake but plausible-looking plaintext during the decryption phase if an incorrect key is used by an eavesdropper. So instead of random garbage, they see gibberish messages that look real but aren't. It actively deceives the attacker, might even subtly track them or provide misleading data.
That's clever. Deceptive defense.
Exactly. And for broader systems, like the Internet of Things, multi-layer frameworks are crucial, including gateway layers that handle packet filtering, authentication, encryption, along with device layers that ensure the endpoint's integrity and can maybe remove compromised nodes from the network. These combined approaches are just vital for maintaining confidentiality, privacy, and integrity in our increasingly connected world.
Okay, this next part is where we get really specific, diving into behavioral analytics.
Yeah.
What if the attacker is technically a legitimate user? Maybe they've stolen credentials, maybe hijacked an active session. How do you spot the imposter when they look, on paper, like someone who belongs?
This delves into a really fascinating area, user behavior analytics, or UBA. It's a critical aspect of risk analysis and continuous monitoring. And our research looking into this shows that individual users have profoundly unique computer search behaviors, how they look for things on their own machine. And a deviation from this established personal norm can be a powerful indicator of a masquerade attack. It's not about what they can access, because they have legitimate credentials, but how they access it. The subtle patterns of their interaction that can betray their true identity or lack thereof. This is particularly relevant for spotting insider threats or external attackers acting like insiders.
That's a fascinating hypothesis. Why would a masquerader's search behavior be so different from the legitimate user they're impersonating? It seems like they could just try and mimic typical actions.
Well, the core hypothesis is actually quite robust, based on observation. Legitimate users search in a limited, targeted, and highly unique fashion because they know their own file system extremely well.
Right.
They created their environment, they've organized their files, or lack thereof. They know precisely where their important documents and applications reside. They navigate with purpose and efficiency, usually. Masqueraders, on the other hand, lacking this intimate familiarity with the victim's system, tend to search much more extensively, more broadly. Their intent is primarily to explore and gather information they don't already possess, rather than perform a specific known task. This inherent lack of knowledge forces them into distinct, exploratory search patterns that are measurably different from the legitimate user's routine. They're basically looking for the lay of the land, not just navigating familiar paths.
Okay, that makes sense. They're lost, essentially. So how do you actually detect this subtle behavioral anomaly? How do you quantify familiarity versus exploration?
Our detection methodology utilizes machine learning, specifically something called one-class support vector machines, or OSCE-SVM. This approach is powerful because it models only the normal, legitimate user behavior. It doesn't need to know what bad or masquerader behavior looks like beforehand, which is a huge advantage since attacker tactics are always changing. It trains on a baseline of the legitimate user's typical actions, then flags anything that deviates significantly from that established personal norm as potentially malicious. To make this practical for real-time monitoring, we group user activity into short, 2-minute epochs, short bursts of user interaction, and then extract specific behavioral features from these windows. This granular analysis allows for pretty rapid detection without heavy computational overhead.
2-minute windows.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the key features you found that reliably reveal these masqueraders within those short bursts of activity?
We identified 3 critical features that turned out to be remarkably strong indicators. First, the number of automated search-related actions. Masqueraders, often wary of generating logs or drawing attention, tend to avoid using the built-in desktop search tools or operating system search functions, trying to evade detection. This makes their number of automated search actions significantly lower than for a legitimate user who might frequently use those tools for efficiency.
Interesting. They search less automatically.
Right. Second, the number of file touches. Malicious masqueraders, actively searching for information they don't know the exact location of, will access a significantly higher number of files than a legitimate user performing routine tasks. They're exploring broadly, opening many files just to see what they are, ascertain their content and relevance. And third, the percentage of manual file system navigation user actions. Again, because they don't know the layout, masqueraders show a much higher percentage of manual directory traversal clicking through folders and directories one by one compared to a legitimate user who probably knows where their files are and navigates more directly, maybe using shortcuts or recent file lists. A legitimate user might go straight to C. Users John Doe documents projects report.docx. A masquerader is more likely clicking through C, users than John Doe, then documents, then projects, etc., generating a very distinct, hesitant pattern of navigation.
Those sound like very precise and, actionable indicators.
Yeah.
How effective was this approach in your experiments, and what does this mean for our listeners in terms of practical security skills they should be developing?
The experimental results were remarkably strong, actually, really demonstrated the power of behavioral analytics in this context. Our methodology achieved a 100% detection rate for the malicious masquerader activity we tested, with only a 1.1% false positive rate, which is very low. This significantly outperformed previous methods, which often had much higher false positive rates while still missing some of the masqueraders. So, this highlights a powerful skill for monitoring and responding to incidents for our listeners, the ability to conduct assessments based on these behavioral anomalies. This approach is especially useful for insider threat detection, protecting against identity theft even when credentials are stolen, and for understanding sophisticated lateral movement by an attacker who's trying to blend in. It also has significant performance benefits. Using just a small, targeted set of features greatly reduces computational complexity compared to, say, modeling a wide range of application frequencies, allows for efficient real-time detection on endpoints without bogging them down. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture again, these principles layered security, continuous vigilance, the absolute criticality of robust endpoint integrity, they extend even further into the most vital infrastructure we have. Industrial control systems and the Internet of Things, or IIoT, here the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking not just data, but physical safety, environmental protection, potentially massive economic stability.
Industrial IoT, right. That's fascinating and maybe a bit scary. So we're talking about things like the controls in a factory, a power grid, smart city infrastructure, maybe even the controls in vehicles. Why is endpoint security particularly critical there? And what are the unique challenges in those environments?
Exactly. Industrial applications are incredibly diverse, often controlling physical processes directly. Things like actuators in vehicle control systems, pumps, heaters, flow meters in manufacturing systems, sensors and smart grids. These require highly specific and really robust endpoint security simply due to the potential for severe safety incidents, environmental disaster, massive equipment damage from attacks. A successful cyber attack here could lead to actual physical harm to people, widespread power outages, catastrophic economic disruption, way beyond just mere data theft. The challenges are unique too because these systems often have very long life cycles, decades sometimes. They might operate in harsh physical environments, they often have limited processing power or memory, and they demand extremely high reliability and availability, all of which makes traditional IT security practices like frequent patching or deploying heavy agents really difficult.
That dramatically raises the stakes, yeah. How do they approach security in such high-risk scenarios? Do they have different security levels based on the potential impact if something goes wrong?
Yes, precisely. Security levels are typically determined by a careful risk assessment, acknowledging that not all systems face the same threat profile or have the same potential impact. The Industrial Internet Consortium, IIC for example, defines three main levels. Security Level Basic, SLB. This is designed to defend against casual or opportunistic attackers, provides fundamental protection against common, unsophisticated threats. Security Level Enhanced, SLE. Steps it up. Defends against attackers with moderate skills and resources, capable of targeted attacks using known vulnerabilities, exploiting common misconfigurations. Security Level Critical, SLC. This is the highest level, designed to defend against attackers with sophisticated means and extended resources. Think nation-state actors or well-funded criminal enterprises capable of custom zero-day attacks and advanced evasion techniques. Each IoT endpoint needs to be assigned an appropriate level of security commensurate with its specific risk and potential impact. That's a crucial part of the governance and risk analysis process in these environments.
Okay, so it's about matching the defense level to the threat and the risk with an escalating set of requirements. What are the key architectural elements for these layered security approaches in IoT, starting from the very foundation upwards?
At the absolute foundation for all security levels is the root of trust,
IoT. This is a fundamental, ideally immutable basis for endpoint security. Provides essential functions like establishing the endpoint's identity, secure storage for keys, cryptographic operations. It's critical for attesting to the integrity of the hardware and software. For the enhanced SLE and critical SLC security levels, the ROT absolutely must be hardware-based and tamper-resistant. Often requires a dedicated hardware security chip, like a Trusted Platform Module, TPM, that cannot be easily modified or bypassed. Closely linked is endpoint identity, a fundamental building block essential for most other security measures. Provides a unique, verifiable identity for each device, allowing for secure authentication and authorization within the industrial system. And what happens when these critical IoT systems actually boot up? Is there a secure process for that, given the potential for malicious firmware being loaded?
Absolutely critical. Secure boot is crucial for maintaining integrity from the very first moment the device powers on. It provides attestation of the firmware and the bootloaders, preventing unauthorized updates or malicious code from being loaded during startup. This process extends that platform-level attestation from the initial power-on bootstrap right through to the operating system startup. helps prevent the installation of malicious firmware or boot images that could compromise the whole system. Following that, cryptographic services are vital, ensuring data protection, authenticity, integrity, both for data at rest on the device and data in transit. Utilizes robust protocols like Transport Layer Security, TLS, Secure Shell, SSH, Internet Protocol Security, IPsec, for encrypting communications. This directly supports secure communications, which protects data as it moves across the network. Essential in environments where physical access to wiring might even be a possibility.
Okay, so ROT, Identity Secure but Crypto Secure Comms. As the security levels increase from basic up to enhanced and critical, what additional layers get added to protect these really vital systems?
Right. For SLE and especially for SLC, endpoint configuration and management becomes critical. This involves detecting and preventing unauthorized changes to the firmware, the OS, or the installed applications. It also involves enforcing application-level controls, maybe preventing the use of weak or insecure ciphers or hash algorithms. It's all about maintaining the known good, validated state of the endpoint. For SLC, continuous monitoring is an absolute requirement, providing real-time oversight of the endpoint, looking for configuration changes, unauthorized activities, performance anomalies that might indicate compromise. This monitoring data typically feeds into a policy and activity dashboard. This gives the OT, operational technology operators and administrators, centralized visibility and control for potentially thousands of remote endpoints. Includes remote policy management and aggregated event data for effective incident response. And at the highest level for critical security, SLC, security information and event management, SIEM, is often implemented. This involves centralized log management and correlation across the entire industrial ecosystem, not just endpoints, but network devices, applications. Provides comprehensive threat intelligence, enables rapid detection of complex attack patterns that might span multiple systems over time. This really directly integrates topics we cover in courses like BCIS 4345, physical security considerations, governance, risk analysis, encryption, and that whole continuous cycle of implementation, evaluation, and maintenance of security measures. Reinforces that security in these critical environments is absolutely a holistic, continuous process.
Wow, what an incredible deep dive. We've really unpacked the sophisticated and sometimes scary world of endpoint vulnerabilities today. From the diverse malware families like ransomware that, as we learned, actively kill our defenses, to those insidious application attacks exploiting subtle code flaws. We looked at traditional defenses, then confronted that alarming reality of EDR killers actively bypassing our frontline security tools right down at the kernel level. But maybe more importantly, we've armed you, hopefully, with insights into building truly resilient systems, embracing that defense-in-depth strategy, leveraging critical network and identity telemetry as independent verification layers, exploring proactive deception technologies, and even profiling unique user behaviors to detect those masqueraders who might slip past initial authentication. You're now equipped, I hope, with the knowledge to not just identify risks, but to implement, evaluate, and continuously maintain robust security measures against these constantly evolving threats.
Indeed. And that ongoing battle for network and system security requires us to constantly evolve our own understanding of these computer-related risks, to engage in that continuous cycle: analysis, implementation, evaluation, maintenance. By integrating these diverse perspectives and best practices, from understanding fundamental malware all the way to advanced evasions like EDR killers and even the specific needs of IIoT security levels, you gain the skills needed. Skills to configure and manage security operations effectively, conduct precise assessments, and monitor and respond to incidents efficiently, ensuring the integrity and protection of electronic data systems against whatever future trends emerge. This holistic view, connecting all these dots, is really what defines a truly prepared cybersecurity professional today.
And this isn't just about cybersecurity in the abstract. It's about owning your own growth in this rapidly changing technological landscape. Understanding how attackers operate, how our defenses are constantly being challenged, and what truly makes a system resilient. That's the mark of a forward-thinking professional in MIS, CIS, or IT. Don't forget, if you found this deep dive valuable, please do like, subscribe, and share it. Your support really helps us continue to bring you these essential insights. And for those additional resources we mentioned to really bolster your learning and career, make sure to check the description below. So as you step back into your networks, your systems, maybe your labs, ask yourself this. Given the relentless evolution of threats that can literally blind our primary defenses, what will be the next frontier of protecting our digital perimeters? And maybe more importantly, how will you adapt your defenses to stay not just one, but maybe two steps ahead? Stay connected, stay secure. Until next time, keep your network strong, your data protected, and your curiosity alive.